On the former council capital, now renamed Harmony Center, Ambassador Linera tended gardens with children from 15 different species. Her sentence had been adjusted to allow her to teach Cenobotany, her original field before politics. The children, many recovering from various injuries, showed no fear of the former council official who had once dismissed their lives as insignificant. The flame flowers respond better to morning light, she explained to a young Arcturian whose limbs were still healing from an old mining accident. They sense the specific wavelengths of a rising sun. Like how my people can sense emotions, the child asked. Linera nodded with genuine interest. Precisely. Different adaptations for different worlds, but all valuable. Across the galaxy, other former council officials served their sentences in similar roles: teaching, healing, building. The human approach to justice had confused them initially. They had expected revenge but received rehabilitation. Admiral Wilson prepared to retire from active service. His final mission took him to the edges of explored space, where new species were being contacted under Alliance protocols that emphasized respect for all sentient life, particularly the young. The Thomas Miller Protocol ensures we never repeat the mistakes of the past, Wilson explained to his successor, Commander Reed. Our first question when meeting new life must always be, how do we protect their children? Reed, promoted after his role in the operation against the Council, nodded. The irony isn't lost on me. The Council fell not because we were stronger, but because they couldn't understand why hurting one child would unite our entire species. On the flagship's observation deck, they watched as diplomatic teams prepared for first contact with a newly discovered civilization. What do you think those poor aliens would think? Reed mused. If they knew their first interaction with Galactic society might have been with the Council instead of the Alliance. Wilson smiled. They'll never know how much they owe to one curious 8-year-old boy. Back on Viridian, Thomas Miller stood at his window, watching the stars. He still collected model ships, but now he had ones gifted from 20 different worlds. A message arrived on his personal terminal, a video from children at the rehabilitation center where Drav worked. Thank you, Thomas, they said in various languages. Your story changed our lives. Thomas smiled and reached for his stylus to write back. His hand moved smoothly, a testament to human persistence, medical innovation, and the power of a species that had proven a simple truth to the galaxy. Those who harm human children discover that size, technology, and numbers mean nothing when facing humanity's unified response. The stars seemed brighter somehow, as if reflecting a universe fundamentally changed by one child, and the species that refused to forget him. The Council's iron grip on galactic politics had been broken not by superior firepower, but by humanity's unwavering commitment to justice for a single child. Thomas Miller, watching the proceedings from a special observation area, turned to his mother. Did we win? He asked. Lisa Miller brushed his hair gently. We did more than win, Thomas. We changed everything. 5 years after the tribunal, the galaxy operated under new principles. The Grand Alliance replaced the Galactic Council, with leadership rotating among member species. Humanity had declined permanent leadership positions, preferring to serve as architects rather than rulers of the new system. On Viridian, where everything began, a monument now stood at the site of the diplomatic center. A simple stone column bore the inscription, "For Thomas Miller and all children, justice remembers." Thomas himself, now 14, walked with a slight limp but otherwise showed remarkable recovery. The neural regeneration treatments, once experimental, had become standard care across Alliance space for similar injuries. He stood beside Admiral Wilson, watching as representatives from 32 species gathered for the annual Remembrance Day. Do you ever think about Commander Drav? Thomas asked. Wilson nodded. I visited his assignment last month. He works at the Rehabilitation Center on Proxima Colony. Has he changed? 3 years of helping injured children does change most beings, Wilson replied. Even those as rigid as Drav. The ceremony began with speeches from Alliance representatives, but the most powerful moment came when children from different species, including those formerly classified as lesser by the Council, released glowing lanterns into the night sky. In her office on Earth, President Carter reviewed reports from across Alliance space. The transition had not been entirely smooth. Several former Council races had initially resisted the new order, but faced with unified opposition from species they had long oppressed, they eventually accepted reality. The education initiatives are showing promising results, noted her aide. Former Council worlds are experiencing significant shifts in attitude, particularly among younger generations. Carter nodded. And the reparations programs? On schedule. Former Council races have met 87% of their obligations to rehabilitation programs for victims of their policies. The President smiled slightly. Who would have thought that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic politics would come from protecting one child? Send word to Earth, he ordered. Phase 1 complete. Preparing for Phase 2. On screens across Council space, a simple message appeared in universal language. Humanity has entered the conversation. The Grand Hall of Earth Justice, constructed in just 30 days for this specific purpose, stood silent as the proceedings began. Representatives from every human world filled the observer sections. Diplomatic envoys from non-Council species sat in designated areas, their presence a tacit acknowledgement of humanity's new status. High Commander Drav and Ambassador Linera sat with 12 other Council officials in the center of the chamber. They wore no restraints, but neural inhibitors prevented any aggressive action. Around them, human security personnel maintained a respectful but vigilant watch. President Eleanor Carter entered, followed by Admiral Wilson, and the 7 judges selected to oversee the tribunal. Unlike traditional courts, this tribunal included not only legal experts but also medical specialists, child development professionals, and ethicists. This tribunal is now in session, announced Chief Justice Garcia. We gather to address actions taken against Thomas Miller and to consider evidence of broader patterns of conduct by Galactic Council representatives. Drav stood, his 3 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. I do not recognize this court's authority, he declared. The Galactic Council has sole jurisdiction over actions taken by its representatives. Justice Garcia nodded calmly. Your objection is noted. However, this tribunal proceeds under the Universal Rights Doctrine, which all sentient species, including your own, have acknowledged in principle if not in practice. The first evidence presented came from Thomas Miller himself. Now 9 years old, he entered the chamber in a hovering medical chair. Though still partially paralyzed, months of treatment had improved his condition enough for limited mobility in his upper body. Thomas, Justice Garcia said gently, can you tell us what happened that day at the diplomatic center? The boy's voice trembled slightly, but his words came clear. I just wanted to see what the alien computer looked like. I touched the screen, and then the alarm started. The blue man, he pointed at Drav, said something, and then they shot me with the glowing stick. It hurt more than anything. When I woke up, I couldn't move anymore. Drav interrupted. The human youth breached a secure system containing classified. You will have your opportunity to speak. Garcia cut him off firmly. The child has the floor. What followed was a methodical presentation of evidence that stretched far beyond Thomas's case. Human intelligence operatives had extracted council records going back centuries, revealing a disturbing pattern of abuses against lesser species and their young. Video testimony from representatives of 17 different species described similar incidents. Children harmed for minor infractions, families denied justice, entire communities punished for the actions of individuals. Ambassador Linera watched with growing discomfort as her own private communications appeared on the display screens, messages mocking human attachment to their young, suggesting that primitive emotional bonding made humans unfit for advanced civilization. The evidence demonstrates, concluded the prosecution, that the treatment of Thomas Miller was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic approach to non-council species, particularly their children. When the defense phase began, Drav spoke first. "The Council has maintained galactic order for 12,000 years," he stated. "Our protocols exist for security reasons beyond human understanding." The incident with the Miller offspring, while regrettable, followed established procedures for security breaches. Justice Garcia leaned forward. Would these procedures apply equally if the child belonged to a council species? The chamber fell silent as Drav hesitated. That would be unlikely to occur. Council young are properly supervised. The judgment came 3 days later. The tribunal found all 14 council officials guilty of crimes against sentience. The sentence, however, surprised many, including the defendants themselves. "You will not be imprisoned," Justice Garcia announced. "Instead, each of you will serve 10 years providing direct care to children injured in conflicts throughout the galaxy, beginning with Thomas Miller and others harmed by council actions." Drav's face registered shock. "You expect us to become caretakers for human offspring?" Admiral Wilson spoke for the first time during the proceedings. "No, High Commander. We expect you to learn why we fought for one child." Outside the tribunal hall, representatives from dozens of species waited to meet with human delegates. The council world of Vantera celebrated the Festival of Ascension when their communication network failed. One moment, officials exchanged messages across 17 systems. The next, silence. Technicians rushed to diagnostic terminals only to find them locked with an unfamiliar encryption. Across council space, the same pattern repeated. Primary communication hubs shut down simultaneously. Backup systems activated, then froze. Emergency protocols failed to engage. In the Council's Central Command, High Commander Drav demanded answers. "What do you mean system-wide failure?" he shouted at his chief technician. "That's impossible." "Sir, something has bypassed our security at a fundamental level," the technician explained, mandibles clicking nervously. "The intrusion signature is unlike anything in our database." On the main display, red warnings flashed as military installations across council space reported communication blackouts. Defense systems remained operational but could not coordinate responses. "The humans," Drav said slowly, third eye widening with realization. "Their ultimatum expired 1 hour ago." Before he could issue orders, the chamber's lights flickered. The massive doors sealed shut. Emergency alarms activated, then fell silent. "Security breach," announced an automated system. Central Command lockdown initiated. Outside the Council's military headquarters, silent ships appeared in precise formation. They bore no markings, their hulls absorbing rather than reflecting sensor scans. From these vessels launched smaller craft, each targeting specific points in the defense grid. Commander Alex Reed led the first insertion team. His squad, equipped with the stealth technology that rendered them invisible to Council sensors, breached the outer security perimeter without triggering alarms. "Team 1 in position," Reed whispered into his comm. "Proceeding to primary target." Similar teams infiltrated key installations across the Council capital. Their objectives were not random destruction but surgical precision. Disable command structures, isolate leadership, extract specific individuals. Admiral Wilson directed the operation from his flagship, the Retribution. Holographic displays showed real-time updates from each strike team. Unlike traditional military assaults, this operation minimized casualties while maximizing strategic impact. "Status report," Wilson commanded. Communication networks neutralized across 87% of Council space, his tactical officer replied. "Their military vessels are operational but unable to coordinate. Civilian infrastructure remains untouched as ordered." Wilson nodded with grim satisfaction. "And our primary targets?" "Teams are converging on High Command now. Ambassador Linara's location is confirmed. Strike teams report minimal resistance." Inside Central Command, Drav ordered his personal guard to secure the chamber. "Deploy all available forces. Contact the defense fleet. Communications are down, sir, an aide reported. And there's something else. Our internal sensors detect no intruders, but security personnel report direct encounters with invisible attackers. The chamber's reinforced doors began to glow red as something cut through from the outside. Drav drew his ceremonial weapon, a gesture more symbolic than practical. The doors fell inward with a thunderous crash. Through billowing smoke stepped human soldiers in black armor. They moved with practiced efficiency, neutralizing Drav's guards with weapons that caused immediate unconsciousness rather than death. Commander Reed stepped forward, removing his helmet to look Drav directly in his 3 eyes. High Commander Drav, by authority of United Earth Command, you are being detained to face justice for crimes against Thomas Miller and humanity. Drav raised his weapon. The Council does not recognize human authority. Reed did not flinch. We're not asking for recognition. A precise shot from Reed's sidearm sent Drav collapsing to the floor, paralyzed but conscious. Across Council space, similar scenes unfolded. Key officials responsible for the Thomas Miller incident were extracted from offices, homes, and secure facilities. In each case, human forces operated with restraint, disabling rather than killing, targeting individuals rather than populations. On Vantara, Ambassador Linera was enjoying dinner when her security detail fell unconscious around her. A human woman in unmarked military attire approached her table. "What is the meaning of this?" Linera demanded. "Do you understand the consequences of attacking the Council, Ambassador?" The human officer smiled thinly. "Better than you understood the consequences of harming the human child." Admiral Wilson watched as reports confirmed the capture of all primary targets. The operation had required just 97 minutes from start to completion. 6 months after Thomas Miller's injury, Earth Ambassador Robert Allen stood before the Galactic Council. The Grand Chamber, with its soaring crystalline dome and hovering platforms for 200 species, fell silent as the human took his position at the speaker's podium. Allen carried a single data tablet. No notes, no diplomatic aids. His gray suit appeared simple next to the elaborate robes and bioluminescent garments of council representatives. "Distinguished members of the Galactic Council," Allen began, his voice steady, "I come before you one final time regarding the incident involving Thomas Miller." A ripple of whispers spread through the chamber. Many council members had expected humans to abandon this matter months ago. Incident. High Commander Drav interrupted from his elevated seat. "You mean the security breach by an undisciplined human offspring?" This matter was settled according to council law. Allen's expression remained unchanged. Thomas Miller was 8 years old. He touched a computer screen out of curiosity. For this, your security forces used a weapon that permanently damaged his nervous system. He tapped his tablet, and images appeared on the chamber's main display. Thomas in his hospital bed, medical diagrams showing extensive neural damage. The boy struggling through physical therapy. "We have petitioned through proper channels. We have requested fair compensation. We have asked only for acknowledgement of wrongdoing and appropriate consequences for those responsible." Ambassador Linera raised a slender hand. "The Council has already ruled on this matter. Your species' attachment to individual offspring, while biologically interesting, does not override galactic security protocols." Allen nodded slowly. "That is your position. I am here to inform you that it is unacceptable to humanity." The chamber grew quiet. Humanity now presents its final request. The officials responsible for authorizing and executing violence against Thomas Miller must face justice. The Council must establish new protocols preventing similar actions against any sentient being's children. And Thomas Miller's family must receive compensation equal to what any Council member's family would receive under similar circumstances. High Commander Drav stood, towering over his platform. "You dare present demands to the Galactic Council. Your species occupies less than a dozen worlds. Your technology is primitive. Your understanding of galactic politics is infantile." Laughter spread through the chamber. Several council members openly mocked the human stance. Alan waited for the laughter to subside. You have 48 standard hours to provide your response. After that time, humanity will consider all diplomatic options exhausted. This triggered more laughter. Drav's 3 eyes narrowed in amusement. Is that a threat, Ambassador? Will your handful of ships challenge the combined might of 200 worlds? Will you declare war over one damaged child? Alan's expression never changed. We are recalling all human diplomats and citizens from Council space, effective immediately. What follows will be the Council's responsibility. He placed a small device on the podium, the traditional symbol for terminated relations. As Alan turned to leave, Drav called after him. This emotional display only confirms what we've long suspected. Humanity lacks the maturity for true galactic citizenship. Perhaps we should reconsider your species status entirely. Alan paused at the exit. High Commander, there is something you should understand about humans. We can forgive many things. We can negotiate, compromise, and adapt. But there is one line no species should cross. He looked back, meeting Drav's gaze directly. You heard our child. The door sealed behind him as he left. In the following hours, human ships throughout Council space began departing. Business contracts were canceled. Research partnerships dissolved. The human withdrawal occurred with calm precision that surprised Council observers. On his flagship, Admiral Wilson received confirmation that the diplomatic mission had been completed. On the main view screen, Thomas Miller appeared in his wheelchair, now able to move one arm with limited control. Are they going to say sorry? The boy asked. Wilson shook his head. No, Thomas. They're not. What happens now? The Admiral checked his tactical display, where hundreds of human vessels moved into position at the edges of monitored space. Now we teach them about consequences. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that officially didn't exist, General Laura Hayes studied the holographic display of Council defense systems. 20 military scientists worked around her, each focused on different aspects of alien technology. Their shield frequencies change on a rotating pattern, said Dr. Morgan, pointing to pulsing blue lines. But we've identified a 3-second vulnerability during the cycle. Hayes nodded. Can we exploit it? Already working on it, Morgan replied, sliding a schematic forward. This projectile weapon fires in bursts timed precisely to the shield rhythm. Testing shows 89% penetration. This scene repeated in secret facilities across Earth and its colonies, while diplomats continued sending polite but firm requests for justice. Humanity's industrial and military complex transformed with quiet efficiency. Factories that once produced civilian ships now created components for new weapon systems. Public announcements claimed this was for infrastructure improvements. No outward signs pointed to preparation for conflict. Humans had learned from history that surprise held immense tactical value. Admiral Wilson personally supervised the creation of Task Force Retribution. He selected commanders not for their aggression, but for their precision and emotional control. We aren't seeking destruction, he told them during their first briefing. We want justice, delivered with surgical precision. Commander Alex Reed, a special operations veteran, led the team that would infiltrate Council space. On a remote training ground on Mars, his operatives practiced with new stealth technology designed to bypass Council sensors. These suits can mask your biological signatures, the technician explained, helping Reed into the sleek black uniform. Their systems are programmed to recognize specific life signs. As far as their sensors are concerned, you'll register as maintenance drones. Reed's team spent months learning Council languages, customs, and security protocols. They studied architectural plans obtained through human allies within Council service industries. Every team member memorized the faces of officials responsible for the Thomas Miller incident. Meanwhile, Thomas himself fought his own battle. In a specialized medical facility in Geneva, doctors used experimental treatments to repair his damaged nervous system. Dr. Anna Powell, the lead physician, made notes as Thomas attempted to move his right arm. That's excellent progress, she encouraged as his fingers twitched slightly. Thomas looked up with determined eyes. "Will I ever walk again?" Powell smiled gently. "6 weeks ago, you couldn't move your fingers. Now look at them. We take one step at a time." What Thomas didn't know was that his treatments utilized medical technology reverse-engineered from Council designs, obtained through channels no official would acknowledge. Across human space, military vessels underwent quiet modifications. Civilian ships received upgrades that could transform them from transports to combat support at a moment's notice. Special emphasis went to electronic warfare systems capable of disrupting Council communications. In the asteroid belt, automated mining facilities increased production of strategic materials. The official explanation cited economic expansion, but the raw materials flowed to military shipyards hidden on the far side of Neptune. Council intelligence noted some of these activities but misinterpreted their significance. Their reports mentioned unusual resource allocation patterns, but concluded humans were simply improving their defensive capabilities, a natural response from a species feeling threatened. High Analyst Grohl of Council Security drafted a brief assessment. Human military preparations remain primitive by Council standards. Their technologies pose no significant threat to our dominance. Their activities likely represent emotional posturing rather than serious preparations for conflict. The report was filed and largely forgotten. Only one Council member, Science Minister Vex, expressed concern during a private meeting with Linara. "Humans display unusual persistence," Vex noted. "Their social structure becomes more unified in response to perceived threats against their young." Linara dismissed his worry. "Their biological instincts make them predictable. They'll expend resources on this emotional response, then return to rational behavior." In Earth orbit, Admiral Wilson received the latest intelligence about Council dismissals of human capabilities. He smiled faintly as he signed the authorization for the final phase of preparations. "History is full of powerful empires who underestimated supposedly weaker opponents," he murmured to his aide, "particularly those with something precious to protect." Admiral James Wilson stood at Thomas Miller's bedside 3 days after the incident. The boy lay still, medical devices monitoring his damaged nervous system. Wilson, a tall man with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too much war, removed his cap and placed a gentle hand on Thomas's arm. "I promise you this will not stand," he whispered to the sleeping child. Outside the room, Mark and Lisa Miller waited, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion. "What happens now, Admiral?" Mark asked, voice hollow. Wilson's face hardened. "Officially, we continue diplomatic protests through proper channels. Unofficially," he paused, glancing around the corridor, "Earth takes care of its own." Within hours, the footage of Thomas's injury spread across human space. The unedited security feed showing Council guards using a neural disruptor on a small boy touched something primal in the human psyche. On colony worlds and Earth itself, citizens gathered in silent vigils. No riots, no violent protests, just millions of humans standing together in the cold night, holding lights that burned against the darkness. In her office on Earth, President Eleanor Carter reviewed the medical reports with her Security Council. "The Council claims full diplomatic immunity under their own laws," her Secretary of State explained. "They've suggested we impose stricter controls on our children to prevent future incidents." The room fell silent. Carter set the reports down carefully, as if they might shatter. "Send our most formal request for justice," she said finally, "through every official channel." "And if they refuse again?" asked her defense minister. Carter met his gaze. "Then we explore other options." The Galactic Council received Earth's petition with disdain. In their grand chamber, representatives from 200 star systems dismissed human concerns as primitive emotionalism. "These humans attach unusual significance to individual offspring," noted Council biologist Turin to scattered laughter. "Most inefficient." Ambassador Linara, responsible for human relations, addressed the Council with barely concealed contempt. The human child accessed restricted systems containing sensitive information, Our response followed long-established security protocols. Their emotional attachment to damaged young is irrational. The species produces offspring at a sufficient rate to replace losses. The Council voted unanimously to reject Earth's petition. Their official response cited human cultural backwardness and suggested Earth reconsider its position within galactic society. That night, after the formal session, Linera met with High Commander Drav over ceremonial drinks. "The humans continue their protests," she remarked. "They seem genuinely disturbed by the neutralization of one defective offspring." Drav's third eye blinked lazily. "Let them protest. What can they do? Their technology is generations behind ours. Their military presence barely extends beyond their home system." Still, Linera mused, there's something unsettling about their response. No threats, no demands for war. Just this quiet, organized anger. Primitive species often display unpredictable behaviors. Drav dismissed. They'll return to rational conduct soon enough. Neither noticed the service worker who cleaned their table afterwards, a human with enhanced hearing implants who transmitted every word to Earth intelligence. Back on Earth, changes began. Manufacturing centers across the planet quietly shifted production. Military leaves were canceled. Research facilities worked around the clock on classified projects. None of these adjustments appeared significant in isolation, but together it formed a pattern. A civilization preparing. Thomas Miller began experimental treatments funded by anonymous donors from across human space. His medical care suddenly included technologies previously unavailable to civilians. In the Miller home, a delivery arrived, a small handcrafted wooden box containing medals of service from military units throughout human space, each with a note bearing the same message: "We stand with Thomas." Admiral Wilson received reports from his intelligence officers about these developments while reviewing new weapon designs. "The Council still believes we're just emotional and helpless," his intelligence chief reported. Wilson nodded. "Good. Let them think that a while longer." He turned to look at a star chart where Council worlds glowed in red. Humanity has never been good at forgetting harm done to our children. Thomas Miller loved space. At 8 years old, he collected model ships, memorized star charts, and dreamed of visiting every planet in the galaxy. His parents, Mark and Lisa Miller, worked as junior diplomatic staff at the human colony on Viridian, a frontier world that served as a meeting point between Earth representatives and the vast Galactic Council. The day everything changed started like any other. The colony buzzed with activity as officials prepared for the arrival of Council delegates. Security measures tightened, but Thomas, ever curious, found ways to explore despite the restrictions. "Stay in the residence area today," his mother had warned that morning. "The visitors don't always understand our ways." Thomas had nodded, but the allure of seeing real alien diplomats proved too tempting. He slipped away during lunch, following service corridors he discovered during previous adventures. His small frame allowed him to duck behind supply crates when guards passed. The Council ship landed with impressive ceremony. Thomas watched from behind an air vent as tall, blue-skinned beings with elaborate headpieces descended the ramp. Their leader, High Commander Drav, moved with cold precision, flanked by security forces carrying weapons unlike anything Thomas had seen before. "The human colony appears adequate," Drav noted to an aide, "though their security remains primitive." Thomas followed at a distance, eventually reaching a temporary command center the Council had established. The doors stood partly open as technicians moved equipment inside. With the adults distracted, Thomas slipped through, eyes wide at the glowing consoles and hovering displays. One terminal sat unattended, its screen pulsing with symbols that shifted and changed. Thomas approached, fingers hovering over the strange controls. Just one touch, he thought, just to say he'd interacted with real alien technology. His small hand made contact with the interface. Alarms blared instantly. Before Thomas could move, Council security forces surrounded him. High Commander Drav strode forward, ice cold. "Security breach." "Detain the infiltrator," Drav ordered. "He's just a child," shouted a human technician from across the room. The council guards ignored the protest. One raised a neural disruptor, a weapon meant for subduing adult threats, and fired directly at Thomas. The boy collapsed, body convulsing as the energy tore through his developing nervous system. When human security finally pushed through, they found Thomas unconscious, his small body damaged in ways that would never fully heal. Mark and Lisa Miller rushed to the medical facility, faces pale with shock. "What happened?" Mark demanded as doctors worked frantically over his son. The colony governor looked grim. Council security classified him as an intruder. They used full force before anyone could stop them. "He's a child," Lisa cried. "He's just a curious child." When Thomas stabilized, the diagnosis crushed what hope remained. Permanent damage to his motor functions, potential cognitive impairment, years of rehabilitation ahead with uncertain results. Mark Miller, hands shaking, filed a formal complaint with the council. Their response came within hours, a cold, formal statement. The security response followed standard protocol for unauthorized access to council diplomatic systems. While regrettable, the human youth's actions constituted a breach of security. The council claims immunity under Galactic Treaty Section 47.3. No apology, no reparations, no justice. When the human ambassador demanded a meeting with Drav, the commander merely shrugged. "Your offspring lack proper discipline. Consider this a learning opportunity for your species." News traveled quickly through human space. On view screens across 100 worlds, people watched footage of a small boy being carried from the diplomatic center, broken by those who claimed to represent galactic civilization. In orbit above Viridian, Admiral James Wilson received the report on his flagship's bridge. His expression remained neutral, but his knuckles turned white as he gripped the datapad. "Set course for Earth," he ordered quietly, "and send a private message to Central Command. Code level, Crimson." The first seeds of humanity's response had been planted.